Okay, good day to everyone. This is a recording to focus on management ethics for or towards ethical decision making. So to start with, let us try to explore the context of where an educational leader is situated, especially being surrounded with the following contexts. The 21st century landscape, we really need to be aware of this and adapt to these changes, especially with globalization. Although globalization has been a key concept that has prompted many educational institutions to really improve themselves and redirect and change paradigms. But now globalization is made more significant, made more important and crucial, especially with the advent of technology. And we are really living in a global village, shrunken global village. And with that, there is a need for us to also take into consideration the value of inclusion, inclusive teaching, and leading practices in our educational setup. Of course, these are all interrelated concepts that you find yourself um, and you would be confronted with these kinds of issues. So if these are not issues, you would be confronted with these key concepts so that you would, as an educational leader, be able to successfully lead in this diverse and complex era. Adding to that, of course, is the type of reality that we live in right now, the VUCA world. And we are, of course, confronted with the uh, demands, the workplace demands of the fourth industrial revolution, the fire. Okay, so just try to have an overview of each. We understand that when we try to lead in all our actions, be it on the micro level or the macro level, we would always and we should always make ways to contribute in the realization of the sustainable development goals that we have projected, that hopefully we would be able to realize and make significant gains towards 2030. And indeed, we made significant gains, but there is also a significant buffer, a significant um, step back. It's because of the pandemic. But nonetheless, in the educational sector, in the academy, we really play a very important role, not just in SDG number 4 in quality education, but across all the 17 SDGs. When you talk about climate action, when you talk about sustainable communities and cities, when you talk about reduced inequalities and others, no poverty, zero hunger, I think education would really play a crucial role in that. And us being educational leaders, all our actions, all the plans that we should be conceptualizing and we should be executing should be geared towards the collective global effort towards attaining this sustainable development goals. Another thing is, of course, when you talk of inclusion, talk of globalization, internationalization, there would be many factors to consider with regards to how we try to structure educational institutions in our processes also and how we try to lead as educational leaders. But at the center of it all, when we try to change, when we try to improve our leadership and structure, our curriculum and co-curriculum, faculty support and other human resources, mobility, partnerships, and our commitment and policy towards internationalization, at the center of it all should be improved teaching service, teaching, research, and service. Those are the three pillars, really, the three main functions, especially in the higher education. Okay. And of course, reflecting on globalization connected with being now able to accommodate learners of different backgrounds, different cultural loads. We could call those loads. When you talk of inclusion, therefore, we should be ready as educational leaders to accept learners and educators of diverse background, cultural background. And with that, it's not trying to create and um, replicate somehow a melting pot analogy of that, but it's really more of multicultural education. The recognition that we could coexist, it does not necessarily mean that uh, you should remove, you should submit to our dominant culture. We could coexist. You could still maintain your cultural identity, and we should advocate that as part of inclusive practices here in education. But apart from that, the institution should also look into how we could advocate multicultural practices in our instruction and at the same time in how we try to lead. Okay, especially I know most of us educational leaders or even teachers who are now working abroad could really attest to this, of its significance, of its importance. And you just try to think, if you would be in an institution abroad, a foreign, and you are an alien in there, in a sense, you are a minority, you have your own cultural background. If the institution is not accepting of these multicultural practices, is not accepting of your own cultural background, then definitely it would be a violation of your human rights. And another thing, it would really affect how you interact. It would really affect how you try to process learning. And in the end, it would also affect how the students would learn. So it's really very important for us educational leaders to be oriented with this, and not just orientation. It's really trying to find ways on how to integrate this into our own schema of things, so that when we would be when we would be confronted with issues that has something to do with this, then we know how to approach it. Okay. And of course, we are living in the 21st century landscape. Hopefully, we would try also to empathize with the current situation. And when I say empathize, you should not say that during our time, during our time. Yes, during our time, those were the things that should be implemented. Those were the things that should be dominating how we act, how we do things. That of course, in the change of time, especially with the social changes, technological changes, economic, environmental, and especially politics and changes in the government, then we try to adapt. Although there are consequences of adapting, we need to understand that we operate right now as teachers and as educational leaders in the 21st century landscape. We need to recognize that we are dealing with different learners. We need to recognize also that we are dealing with different employees, okay, as teachers. Now, adding to the mix of an already complicated and complex world that we live in as educational leaders, the current generation is really, the current reality that we live in is really described as having volatility, uncertainty, chaotic environment, highly complex, and it's very, very ambiguous. Now, you try to add that in the mix. It's now crucial for us to not just rely on certain textbooks, and then we try to or templates that should have been followed, but we really need to assess the situation. We really need to have that mindset of situational awareness, contingency. I think that would be the word, that you try to understand what's happening at the moment, of course reflecting also of past experiences and looking forward, but you really need to know how to be flexible and adjust to certain situations, especially that the situation that we are in, the reality that we are in, is described as a VUCA reality. Another, the 21st century skills, and then the demand of the industries, especially in the fourth industrial revolution. They are looking for graduates who possess not just the technological skills, the language skills, including very important, once again, cultural readiness is something consistent, well-being and ethical values, human skills, being able to relate and interact. And these are somehow rooted from the four pillars of learning. And the four pillars of learning, learning to know, learning to do, learning to live, and learning to be. Originally, those are the four, but now it has also tried to evolve, especially with the pandemic. It's really a very big disruptor. But it evolved, not that it contradicted, but it evolved when we tried to make it more specific and make it more flexible and adaptable to the current situation, I think. Now, we tried to think of this future work skills demand. It's because the characteristic of the workplace is also evolving, it's also changing. Even in schools, automation is there, digitization is there, the Internet of Things, everything would be uh, controlled at the palm of our hands. And artificial intelligence, these are things that we could not deny to exist. These are things that are happening in the outside world, apart from what's happening inside the academy. So we really need to bridge the gap if there are gaps. And as educational leaders, we should try to think of this as realities, as expectations from our partners, our industries. We are the suppliers, they are those who make the demands. It's not really a matter of um, adapting that the banking concept of education by Paulo Freire or the factory model of education. It's not really like that. But what we are trying to say here is that although yes, we do influence what's happening in the outside world, we should not be totally dependent on them. But I think there should always be a compromise. There are things that are beyond our control, and there are things within our control. Okay, what you think are ideal should and may still be advocated, even if um, the the industries may have set their own ideas also apart from what we have consumed. But the thing is that there should be no disconnect. Uh, there may be variations with regards to our focus and direction, but at the end of it all, the learners should be the welfare of the learners who would become the future uh, uh, employees and the future workplace. They should not be torn in between the gap. We should try to create and develop graduates who may be able to respond to the demands of the workforce. And this is what we should be concerned about. Now, of course, knowing that that's part of our equation, the background is like that. Now, when you do decision making, the difficult part is that it's not that easy. It's because we do not just simply rely on one reference, one source of what is right or wrong. And that's ethics, by the way. What is acceptable and what is not acceptable as a professional, our behaviors and our actions. It's not just one piece of paper. When you would be dealing with multiple people, people of multiple backgrounds, they would have other references. Now, when you try to look at different references, we could say that there are different and multiple ethical paradigms. Therefore, if there is a dominant ethical paradigm that you follow personally, you should also try to reflect on the other existing ethical paradigms. It's because they may not really contradict with what you know. They may actually help. They may actually give more clarity and having a better perspective of what's happening. And what are these? Okay, everything would always zero in to making a decision for the best interest of the student. If the student is involved in the academe, and the next layer would be the best interest of the teacher. If the teacher is involved, and then the best interest of the company or the academe or the institution in general. That would always be our hierarchy of importance. Now, what are the different ethical paradigms? First would be the ethic of justice. When we try to weigh which should be done, what should be followed, what should be um, given more weight, we try to reflect on is would it provide justice, the element of justice, the concepts of incrementalism, the faith for the legal system, and the hope for progress. Of course, we would always try to rely on how would we know if it's wrong, right or wrong? What does the law say? What would the regulations say? Okay, and we are hopeful that the legal system that we try to follow would really indeed provide justice. Okay? The next would be the ethic of critique. It would always be that for a certain decision, for a certain side, there would always be contradictories for it. You could always say something negative about it. But the idea is that it's not entirely wrong. It's okay. What's wrong is that you would end with it. Now, the idea of critical pedagogy would be from critical thinking, from looking at faults, it should be geared towards action, for positive action. When you would point out something as a flaw, you should be ready for a remedy. You should be ready for an alternative action, not just ending it with just mere um, verbal complaints or whatever. Okay, so it's okay if we do criticize, but the criticism, aside from it to be constructive, it should be geared towards positive action. That would should be at the end or at the back of our minds. At in the end, that should be um our hope. Okay. Next is the ethic of care. Okay. You try to balance in the making decision, would it be legal or illegal in the ethic of justice? Would it drive towards positive action? Or would it be um dealing with, would it counter to the ideas of loyalty, trust, and empowerment? Okay, as simple as that. We will try to tap into the human element. It's because of emotions. You should not, in making decisions, you should not try to compartmentalize and not allow your emotions to affect your decisions, but being part of human beings, we acknowledge that. But the thing is that it should be balanced. So therefore, it should not just be coming entirely from the heart without from the mind and others, but we consider that it should be part of the equation. And another thing, of course, aside from the general legal aspects of things, the ethic of the profession. We all follow what is accepted as right or wrong, what is expected to that should be done and should be avoided, unique to our profession. Okay, our own code of ethics. So, when you try to use references, when you try to weigh on things, reflect on the following sources so that you could arrive at an ethical decision making. However, even if you try to follow those, the thing is that it should still be grounded on data. It should be grounded on facts. Uh, so I would want now to push forward this evidence-based decision making. It appears that um, a good leader should not just be a leader with compassion, but a leader who who acknowledges facts. Okay, hindi lang po puro emosyon, puro puso, but we should also try to be grounded on facts, not just on mere theories and emotions. Now, why do we need evidence? It's because when you try to think, try to reflect and what to decide on with regards to our direction, it would actually inform us so that we would guided on where we should be headed, how to get there, and so on. We should not just be relying merely on luck and intuition and gut feeling as educational leaders. That would be a very uh, risky um, course of action, risky um, way of dealing things. Now, why? It's because it replaces hunches. Uh, it facilitates a clear understanding of gaps. How would you know whether we have already attained a certain level that we should have attained? And the data will tell us. The data or may not really be that uh, foolproof, but it's better than not having data at all, and we would just simply rely on gossip. Okay, and we would be able to identify the root causes. It would be very difficult for us to resolve a particular symptom only, and by that we would be exhausting our efforts. But if we fail to identify the root cause, then it would still keep on coming. We did not really resolve the issue. We have just tried to do a band-aid solution of things. But with the data, now we would be guided on which um, things should we focusing on to address, and the impact of processes on the stakeholders. Of course, how would you know whether you have actually met the expectation of your stakeholders? Then data would tell us, and it would somehow give us a clearer picture of equity. Okay? And targeted services based on needs, of course. If you would start with training needs analysis and so on, the training needs analysis would be through gathering of data, not just relying on your own assumptions. That we do, the number of programs and activities that we do, but which among the efforts that we do really would yield positive results. It also determines cost effectiveness towards efficiency, trying to balance the resources, the funding that we have allotted to one particular program. Would it really yield the maximum results given the the limited resources that you have? Especially as educational leaders, the funds are not infinite. The funds are we should just live with what we have. Okay, and when we try to allocate portions of the pie as the funds, uh we would be um we would be getting a share for a particular focus, and yet it would also mean that we are getting um um an allocation for another priority also. So it's a matter of prioritizing. And it really would confirm whether what is being um, advertised, what is being um, uh, projected in the social media or in any other media is really consistent with the actual results. It would actually lessen the resistance to policies and changes. When you try to argue and when you try to convince people, it's easier if our decisions and our directions are grounded by theories. And it's for continuous quality improvement. You would know whether you are on the right track. You would know whether which actions you need really to exert more effort on, or which actions you need to abandon totally, or what. And it would predict and prevent failures. Okay. With data, you should not be doing the same old thing, knowing that it would generate the same result, old result. Okay. So you should learn from history through the data that is being revealed already. And it would always generate concrete answers, and it's better. But many educational leaders seem to distance themselves, okay, with data. It's just like in during the pandemic, we are creating our own boundaries, and by that we are limiting and we are actually making ourselves blind with regards to directing uh, or formulating a better plan and direction for our institution if we try to distance ourselves away from data. And why is that so? It's because we focus more on programs rather than results. This is a common error, really, that when you see someone busy, it's equivalent already to effectiveness. It's equivalent already to efficiency. And action may not necessarily be translated into the results. So it's not just the number of actions, but it's actually based on the results. Okay, even if you'll be doing something once only, and yet it would yield better results than doing things uh, 20 times more, it does not mean that the other one who did it 20 times more did it better. Okay, and we have less data analyzers. That's a problem. If we are weak in numbers, if we are weak in analyzing the data, then there's a tendency for us to shun data and to move away from data. But as educational leaders, we don't have any other uh, course of action. We have no other way but really to embrace it, whether we like it or not. Okay, and it's many would assume that it's not part of the work description. Okay, and it's a waste of time. And there are no knowledge management systems established for it. And we tend to um, put less value in the importance of the data. Then there's less transfer. Okay, especially with the different offices, the inconsistencies of the type of data that we get, then the previous unpleasant experiences with data that may somehow provide us with traumatic experiences, and therefore we try to move away and run away from the data. But if we have embraced the responsibility of being educational leaders, then we need to embrace this also. And maybe because the use of the data before did not really provide us with the equivalent rewards that we were expecting, then that may be a problem. Now, knowing those things, if you are an educational leader already, then you should try to advocate for this. You should try to plan for data gathering, and you should also plan to recognize those who are utilizing this. And what are the different measures of data? These are data that are already available in educational settings, especially that the schools are the richest institutions. We are the data banks. Okay, if we could just translate those data um, into currencies, then we really are schools are really are the richest institution. It's just a matter of trying to utilize the data that we have. Now let's try to proceed with ethical reasoning. I'm using here by Kitchener, and this is a generic process on how to arrive at ethical decision making through ethical reasoning. But we should acknowledge that there are two ways of arriving at it. First is the use of intuition, or we could do it in a more systematic, scientific, critical, evaluative way. Now, let's just try to explore each. When you talk of intuitive ethical judgment, many of us may tend to be fairly spontaneous and motivated by emotional factors or factors that are not clearly conscious. We are not clearly conscious and aware, and that could be a problem with regards to reflecting on our own decision, how we were able to arrive at those decisions. If those would be through intuition only, then it would be very hard for us to learn from our past decision making. As practitioners, we must able to justify our ethical decisions, especially as educational leaders. It's just not that I made a decision and then that's it. You have that duty and responsibility and accountability of your own decision, and you should be able to provide justification on how you try to arrive at that. So it's a very dangerous one when you would just try simply to rely on intuitive ethical judgment. Although sometimes it would really help also to listen to your gut feeling, but not at all times. So what's being advocated in our profession is, although we should take into account emotional and contextual factors, it should not exclude other options, especially this option, critical, evaluative, ethical judgment. Now, it is a consistent, it's something deliberate analysis of an ethical issue in a process that includes considering professional standards and intensive problem solving based on ethical principles. Now, professional standards is one main source, but you try to reflect on the different sources of ethics what that we have discussed earlier on. The thing is that there's a template, there's a model for ethical decision making, but this is not foolproof. This is not something like in a program that you would just enter the data and then you would arrive at a decision making. At the center of it all is a human being. You are a human being. So you really need to consider also the other factors. Step one is to develop ethical sensitivity. I don't think you would be a successful and effective decision maker insofar as trying to advocate and trying to rely on ethical principles if in the first place you do not know what are the ethics that you should be following. So you need to have formal education in ethics. It's a responsibility, and you should not allow you should not just simply relax and allow them to get near you and approach you. You should be the one to make an effort for continuous education and dialogue with colleagues. That would really help. Open up. You try to listen to different perspectives and different points of views. You try to evaluate case analysis, case presentation, case reports, and so on. The exchange of data, the exchange of what has been done already. And then you try to reflect on your own personal principles and philosophy. Are those consistent with the profession and how? Okay, it would be very difficult for you to adapt a certain ethical principle and yet it would counter to your own personal beliefs. I don't think that would be a good idea. An ethical professional is first a person of virtues. You should walk the talk. At the start of the career, you try to do a self reflection, assess your own. Why are you even in there? Why are you a teacher in the first place? And why are you an educational leader? Is it just merely because of money? If there's money in our profession, even especially if you're in the middle of your career, you should do a self reflection already, self analysis. Are you really built for it? Do you really have what it takes to be an educational leader? Do you have the real compassion for human problems and unwavering commitment? Now, the answer for this should be yes. Okay. If the answer here is no, then I don't think you would be effective as an educational leader. The next step would be now you would be confronted with a problem. Define the problem, define the dilemma, and what would be your options. Once you know that a situation exists wherein there would be ethical dimensions, you need to organize all the relevant cases. Then you try to categorize what are the different ethical issues that are being represented in here. Would it be a matter of the right to privacy versus the right for welfare or putting oneself in danger and so on? So there are many sides of the story, and it's not just one ethical concern that is being hit or put into um, the limelight here. Then you need to brainstorm the potential courses of action. These are the tentative answers. It's not that when you would have already your own tentative answer, then you are already subject to prejudice. No, it's part of human nature. You try to list down everything, all the options, even without censorship. Okay. But the thing is that after laying those down, you try to postpone the action. You may have it in yourself. You try to avoid confirmation bias. Just because it's nature, it's natural for us to have our own hypothesis and then somehow we would be manipulated unconsciously to prove ourselves correct. Okay. We would hate that we would be disproven. We would hate that we would be proven wrong. Okay. But as educational leaders, gearing towards arriving at an ethical decision making, you should try to postpone action first. Withhold muna. And the exciting part will come later. But you try to document all those things. Step three is you try to go back to your main reference, which is the Code of Ethics and Professional Guidelines. What would the Code of Ethics say? Be familiar with the code and you try to be as fast as you can, avoid the unnecessary delays, especially if the dilemma that you are facing with would require urgent attention and action. Now, aside from your code of ethics, how about the relevant laws and regulations? What are existing? Okay, it's not that you should become lawyers also. The thing is that you should have background about legal or laws and regulations. And you need to refer to some agencies. They may be agencies that know more about a particular case, more than you do. And NGOs that may be able also to help the client, if regardless on the who the client would be. As an educational leader, it may be the student, it may be the teacher, it may be the faculty, it may be your co or your colleagues, it may be your co-leader also. And then you try to search out ethics scholarship. What has been written already, been published, having the same ethical issue. Okay. They may give you a different perspective and you would have or you would be more aware of what would be those things that you fail to consider. Okay. And you try now to apply. The application is just within your head. It can bring order and coherence in the discussion. It's just like a simulation. Okay. Then refer to general ethical principles. Once you already have your tentative decision, you try to consult with supervisors and those whom you consider as your advisors in life, advisors in your profession. Gather objective feedback from them. Sometimes um, the cases that you would be in can be intellectually overwhelming and emotionally distressing. When you would have someone with you whom you could share confidential information, who could actually contribute, it would give you a feeling of release, unburden you to some emotional distress that you are experiencing. It would reduce the moral and emotional isolation that you may be suffering. It would actually bring comfort. And it's needed. You need to protect yourself also from being insane. And you need really to be careful and be mindful of your own well-being so that you could function better as an educational leader. Now, when you would try to hear from them, they may not have the answers, but they have the insight, the experience, and then the compassion to share. It can take place in any point of the decision making. It may be if on the onset, or it may be when you already have your initial um, decision to be made, and you would consult with them. It's not just the name, but other important information. Then you need now to deliberate and decide, already taking into consideration the comments, the feedback coming from whom you consider as confidence. And then you try to decide which is most ethical. And we always keep on repeating that when you would be making a decision, you already now try to think what would be its consequences and what should be done. Well, that would be coupled with this kind of decision. You should acknowledge that there would always be costs of the ethical choices. It may result to more work, more pressure, more anxiety. Okay. And then what would be the benefits of doing that then? When you arrive at a decision following this, you would achieve a certain sense of professionalism, that moral courage, that confidence, even respect and admiration coming from your colleagues. Have your supervisor or supervisors have the legal and ethical right to hear the choices. Of course, you should not just keep it to yourself. There would always be a report to be forwarded to a higher authority. You communicate also to those involved, and that would be your best defense, especially in the context of a counselor. But in this case, if you are not a counselor, you are educational leader making a decision, that would actually be your best defense when there would be challenges later on. If you have documented those things, put them into writing, and followed certain procedures and processes rather than just jumping to conclusions and decisions, then this would really be your best defense. Experience without reflection would be wasted, and it actually provides insight. You try to evaluate the flaws if there are any. At the end of the day, you may not really come up with the 100% best foolproof decision. So at the end of the day, there should be that reflection so that when you would experience the same, relatively the same case, then you would know which to improve on already. It creates emotional sensitivity, that acceptance that you are not always right. You are, of course, a human being. You are subject to imperfections and flaws even in your decision making. So, when you try to wrap it up, first is try to develop ethical sensitivity, define the dilemma and the option, refer to the code of ethics and other sources. You try to seek out relevant laws and regulations, search out ethics scholarship, try to read, educate yourself more, then you try to apply in the situation. But then again, it would always be best to gain feedback from those you respect, deliberate and decide, inform the supervisor, implement, document, and action, and you try to reflect. Okay, these are the simple steps that may not really be telling you step one, you should act like this and so on. These are more of templates, procedures, or processes. The actual things to be done would still really be highly dependent on you. But at the end of the day, we should be making a decision that would be for the best interest of our students, our faculty, and of the institution. Finally, let me leave you with this. And there is no single formula to arrive at a best decision when in a dilemma. The best manager assesses the situation, taking into account the different factors at play. You should have that recognition. And you would always keep yourself grounded on sound ethical principles so that you would make credible decisions. With that, thank you. This has been Dr. Amihan in the discussion about management ethics geared towards ethical decision making.